sponsored by the James Madison Council and the National Endowment for the Arts.
Hello, and welcome to the 2021 National Book Festival. I'm Amal El-Mohtar, and I'm here with Christopher Paolini, author of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, as well as Martha Wells, author of Fugitive Telemetry and the Murderbot books. It is such a pleasure to be here to have this conversation with you. And I thought that I would open up with the theme of this year's festival, which is delightful. It's open a book, open the world. So I thought I'd start by asking, how have books opened the world for you?
Well, when I was a kid, I grew up in Fort Worth, and we spent so much time in the Fort Worth Public Library. There was a whole bunch of them, but the big one we went to had the children's books right next to the science fiction and fantasy. So I read a lot of books that were probably over my head at the time. I read Dune way too way too young. I don't recommend it um, um, at that age, but just the ideas being kind of taking in all these different ideas and these different voices and learning how other people thought and learning to see different perspectives as well as just um, seeing different parts of the world through these books. I mean, that was hugely important to me, and I don't think I would have become a writer without that.
Well, like you, I was definitely reading books that I shouldn't have been reading at certain ages, but my parents were really good at letting me make my own decisions of what I was able and what was able to read and what was appropriate. Uh, I was homeschooled my whole life, and so I really had an exaggerated version of the experience that so many of us do have with books, where for me, books were a way of learning about the world and experiencing things I had never experienced before. And I really became convinced that books are the closest thing we have to telepathy. You know, it lets us share the lives of people who are completely different from ourselves and experience things we would never, ever experience. When I finally was able to travel the world for business and get to see things outside of Montana, where I grew up, I wasn't wholly unprepared. I mean, I was still walking around with my jaw hanging open, I won't lie, but I had some sense of how people worked and how the world worked, and that was because of the reading. And I really do think that's a large reason why I became an author, because those stories were giving me these feelings that nothing else did. Well, music gave me feelings also, but stories in general would burrow into my brain and stick with me. And when something gives you an emotional reaction, we tend to be drawn toward it, whether we don't like something and we hate it and we're trying to understand why, or we love it and we also are trying to understand that love. So that's, yeah, books had a huge influence on my life. Understatement of the year.
So I'm wondering, have libraries and librarians like played any particular role in your own development as writers? Like either like the physicality of the library space or guidance that librarians have given you in finding any of these books that were maybe not the right or by some metric, not the right things for the age that you read them at?
Um, for me, yeah, for one thing, they had the library organized where the children's section you were actually supposed to go to the end of the children's section and then turn for the rest of it on some shelves that were extended out. But if you kept going into the corner, you got into the science fiction and fantasy and then the pulp paperbacks and all that kind of thing. And I didn't understand that there was this other children's section I was supposed to be in. I thought they said this corner, they said this part, so I thought they meant this whole part here. So that's one of the ways I started reading books that were a little too old for me. But also, um, just seeing the covers, um, attracted me to a lot of books. For one thing, I was growing up in the '70s, and there weren't a lot of This was before the young adult category was invented by librarians, basically. And so there weren't a lot of children's books where with a female main character or even a female secondary character who wasn't, the babysitter or the load, basically, that was there, or the person that was there to scold them about the fun things they wanted to do. But in science fiction, I was seeing things like, and this is particularly in the public school library I went to also, is these Andre Norton books that had a lot of women on the covers doing exciting things with, swords and, wearing bear skins and, all kinds of other cool stuff that these women were doing. And that's another thing that attracted me to science fiction and fantasy. So I probably wouldn't have become as big a science fiction and fantasy fan without seeing those covers in the libraries, and particularly the pulp covers, which at that time were just like way out there. And now we kind of look back and laugh at them, but to a kid, that's like really exciting. It really tells you there's something really exciting in this book. And of course, a lot of them didn't live up to that promise. But yeah, just seeing the covers and being in the library and being able to kind of wander around like you were talking about and find all these things that you didn't know to look for.
Yeah, I had a very similar experience. Those covers, well, they say don't judge a book by its cover, but it's impossible not to. Um, I mean, I got into reading because of a library. My mom was teaching me how to read. My mom's a trained Montessori teacher, and so she was educating me at home. But I hated the process because I didn't make the link between all these strange marks on the page and my actual everyday life. Like, why should I care about these strange marks when I could be outside playing with my friends? And then one time my mom took me to the public library, which was in Anchorage, Alaska, where we were living at the time, and a really nice library. And as I was wandering around in the children's section, I found this series of very slim children's detective novels. And I had no idea what they were about, but I liked the cover of one of them. So I checked it out, and it was the first book I ever checked out on my own. And when I started reading it, it was as if that a switch got flipped in my head, and all of a sudden, instead of just seeing the words for things, I saw the things that the words represented. And that's when I fell in love with reading and realized it wasn't just a chore. And then later on, I was in, I don't know, it was early 90s, and I saw a David Eddings book in a bookstore. And I loved the cover, and I begged my grandfather to buy it for me, and he did. And I read it, and I was enjoying it immensely until I got to the last 10 pages or so and realized there was no way that the book could end the story in 10 pages. And I wasn't the smartest kid. I realized that this was the middle book of a trilogy. So I ran to my local library and I read all the David Eddings. And then, the internet really wasn't a thing. I had no idea what to read. So I'm staring at Eddings, going, what do I read next? What do I read next? And then 2 shelves down, we go from E to F. And there was this giant book called Magician by Raymond Feist. And then there was the Mossflower Redwall series. And then there was Andre Norton and C.J. Cherry and, Anne McCaffrey. And I'm so happy you mentioned Andre Norton. I think she doesn't get enough attention these days. She did one book called I might be misremembering the title, the Third Moon or the Rings of the Third Moon or something like that.
Moon of Three Rings?
Moon of Three Rings, thank you. And I think there's some really beautifully evocative stuff in there.
She did a lot of tropes and things before they were tropes in science
Yeah.
fiction.
Yeah.
And yeah, sorry, please continue, Christopher. Yeah.
No, I was going to say, and then my family and I self-published my first book, Aragon, and it was the support of the librarians and the libraries that made it possible to do that, because I was able to go and do presentations in the libraries, and and I always had librarians recommending me books and stuff. So yeah, I could talk about libraries for a long time. Yeah, we self-published we had the book on the road for almost a year, and I was doing 2 to 3 1-hour-long presentations every single day for months on end in various both public and school libraries. So it was quite the experience.
Oh, I was going to say, it was just, I love knowing the role that libraries played in that, because when I was working in a bookstore, Aragon seemed like this fully formed phenomenon that had just happened. And you don't really, I'm also thinking of the sort of different internet that existed at that time. The way that I know things about books now is extremely from the internet, and at the time was very, very different and stuff. So I'm so happy to get to know this about its origins.
Well, I've never encountered someone who's had an overnight success where the overnight success took less than 3.5 to 4 years.
Extremely. I mean, Martha, I think you have a slightly different experience of this in that a lot of people, know that you are the author of the Murderbot Diaries, but sort of think that, aha, this is when like Martha Wells appeared on the scene, as opposed to the fact that you had been publishing novels for 20 years before.
Yeah, I've been on the scene a long time, but I've never done anything anywhere close to that popular before. So for a lot of people, they think that All Systems Red was my first book. So it's been kind of interesting.
When was your first book published?
1993, a long time ago.
Actually, can I ask, Martha, can you speak a bit about like the difference in the publishing landscape between your first novel and like this renewed attention and success to your books?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting trip to look back on. When my first book was published, it was The Element of Fire, and it is actually published by Tor Books. Um, you kind of just the book came out, and if you were lucky, you had friends living near you who threw a party for you, and maybe you did a signing at your local bookstore, and then that was it. And I'm lucky where I live, in Texas, especially at that time, there was a lot of science fiction and fantasy conventions around. So, that were within driving distance because I couldn't afford to go to anything out of state. And so you could go to a convention and, see your book on a table and people were reading it and stuff like that. And so that would really be your only idea of how well the book was doing. If you went to something like Worldcon and your editor invited you to dinner, then you knew you were doing okay. That was about I mean, it was basically, you know, like interpreting the future through bird entrails or something was slightly more accurate than what tools you had as an author at that time to tell how well your book was doing.
So was the publisher giving you any sales figures, or was it just all very vague?
You got your royalty reports, and if and then hopefully your agent would interpret them for you. But yeah, for the first year or so, you really had very little idea. Um, and nowadays, it really does feel like you know if your book is going to be a success or not on the first day by looking at Amazon and seeing and the other tools that writers now have. I feel like it would be so much more stressful nowadays to be a debut author because and have a big hit. Um, just the attention you would get. Um, and just immediately. And I know that my when I was I guess I think I was 26 when I wrote the book. I think I was 28 when it came out. And there's no way at that time I would have been able to handle the kind of attention I would have gotten from, say, something like Murderbot. My books always tended before Murderbot, my books always kind of tended to have a slow build where they come out and it feels like no one's reading them, no one's looking at them. And then very slowly again you start seeing people talk about them and you start getting word of mouth and they have this kind of long trail. Um, and yeah, I don't know how I would have handled the attention. I don't know how young authors now who have a book come out that just makes a big splash immediately and how they get through that. I think some of them don't. I think you do see people that have their first couple books come out from their contract and then either disappear, kind of not come back for like 3 or 4 years.
I haven't been writing as long as you have, but I feel the same as you, and I'm really happy that social media wasn't a thing when I started publishing. That said, my family's always been very privacy minded, and my parents have always, comporting oneself in public. So I think maybe I would have avoided sticking my mouth and my foot too much, but it's a real risk, and especially if you make that transition from my social media is for me and my friends. It's public, but it's essentially private, and it doesn't matter if I say something because no one's listening to me. To then all of a sudden you publish something and everyone scrutinizes what you've said, and that sometimes can cause problems. It's yeah, it's it's a dangerous and very intense environment these days.
I was thinking of those the vector of the age at which you publish and the potentially massive difference in the industry from one moment or another. Christopher, I was wondering, have you Do you want to speak a bit to the difference in your experience with publishing To Sleep in a Sea of Stars versus the Aragon books?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge difference. I mean, one being that I switched publishers for this book because it's an adult novel versus YA. So, my original publisher is the Random House Children's Division, Knopf Children's, and lovely people there. I'm still working with them and still will be working with them. And then Tor published To Sleep in a Sea of Stars. So, it was a change in corporate culture. And then also, because I've been working with the Random House folks since I was 17, there's a slightly different dynamic than when I came into Tor. And it's like, okay, you're the adult author, you get treated as an adult. It's a different experience. I really enjoyed it. I feel like I learned a lot from it. I'd say the biggest differences are, again, social media and the fact that ebooks are such a thing now. I mean, when Aragon came out, there really were no ebooks to the level there are now. There were no iPads, no Kindles, no Nooks. Amazon wasn't, publishing ebooks the way they do now or selling them. So it's changed. It's really changed. And, you don't have to as an author, but I think that building your fan base and participating in social media is part of the business now. And one can look at like Brandon Sanderson as a shining example of how well he's engaged with his fan base. He had a Kickstarter earlier this year, I think, that raised close to, I think it was like $7 million or something for, yeah, it's like the highest grossing Kickstarter for a book ever for a 10th anniversary edition of The Way of Kings. So you don't, that doesn't happen by accident. That happens by writing things people want to read and then actively engaging that fan base and growing it as much as possible. But that's work. It's business. It's not something that is, takes time and energy. Maybe you have some thoughts on this also, is that a lot of this actually comes down to like physical stamina. How well, how many hours a day can you sit in a chair? How well can you focus? How organized can you be? How is your health? There are a lot of things that can challenge writers that are outside of your control. And, someone like Brandon is, you could say, blessed or very lucky that he's a bit of a machine in that regard. And I certainly know some author friends of mine who haven't been so lucky, and they do really well and they work really hard, but they have other challenges that definitely make it difficult for them to, approach that level of productivity.
Oh, yeah. Just yeah, again, like being able to sit in a chair for a long period of time. Physically, I've had a lot of problems with tendinitis because I, um, my day job up until around 2006 was in IT. So I was working on software and databases and writing and programming and that kind of thing, and just hand problems. And you do that for however long, and then have to come home and then start trying to work on your manuscript kind of thing, and um, that can be really debilitating after a while.
So thinking about we're talking about social media a little bit, talking about the kind of publishing landscape and how it has changed over time. Have either of you had certain experiences of seeing your books kind of create their own communities around them? And if so, have you felt um, like you are more of an observer or a participant in those communities?
I try to stay. I've seen other my other books had sort of had that community building, but not nearly as much. I think the ones before this were the books of the Raxur, and I would see fan art, and people would sometimes send me stuff about them, and that was really cool. But Murderbot really has built little fan communities, or sometimes not so little fan communities. And one thing I try to do is I try to stay out of that because I don't want people to feel um, constrained. I mean, if you want to do something really wacky with it, then I just don't worry about me. I'm not there watching you. That kind of thing. I think that it's none of my business in a way, um, how people are engaging with it, um, personally and with their friends and whatever. That's kind of I wouldn't, I was in fandom for a long time, and I certainly wouldn't have wanted, like, people from the shows where I was in those fanfic communities or fan communities and just, like, looking at us going, well, look at those, what those weirdos are doing now. So I try to stay out of it. But it's interesting to kind of even be on the fringe and people have sent me some really cool stuff like little stickers from that with art, their version of Art's logo and that kind of thing. And also the neatest ones were the patchwork QR codes that said Art sent me.
Oh gosh,
I don't
that's amazing.
I almost burst into tears when I saw that. It was so cool. Um, and so the fact that people are doing this, it's like this, I just see bits and pieces of it. And I really love when people send me fan art or point me to fan art, especially on Twitter, so then I can retweet it and show people. But I try to be really hands off because it's just not my business. I feel like how people engage with the story after the story's finished.
Funny story. More than once, there's been a Twitter account that's popped up in my feed, which is like retweeting murder bot quotes. Uh, and they're always awesome quotes, and it pops up as a recommended account for me to follow on a regular basis, which I thought was pretty funny. I've done both. I've done hands off, and of course, back in the day, there wasn't social media, as I keep saying. So hands off was kind of what it was. And because I live in Montana, and when I toured, I was touring by myself, and I didn't go to the conventions. I was pretty isolated from the larger authorial sci-fi fantasy community. And then I started going to the conventions. It was a conscious choice on my part. I was like, everyone talks about me, but they haven't met me. And let's start going out there. Let's start meeting some people, hang out with some of my peers, and see what happens. And it was a really good experience and a really good choice. And that opened up a lot of stuff for me. But as far as the fan communities go, I'm pretty engaged these days. Part of it is I grew up with the internet. I was a 17-year-old homeschooled boy who wrote a fantasy book about dragons. I am the fantasy sci-fi nerd, but I never try to police or control the fan community because their enthusiasm is theirs, their love is theirs, and what they want to do with it is theirs. So if they want to make some silly meme, if they want to do something crazy, I just stay out of it. But I love the fan art. There's a group of people who actually took the world from Aragon, and built it in a 1-to-1 scale on a Minecraft server. I just released a video. It's a 40-minute video where I toured it, and it's amazing. I mean, they literally built the entire world, and I can't even wrap my brain around it. That love that they have. So. But I try to give back to the fans as much as I can because it's their support that has let me do this as a profession since I was a teenager. I mean, I have not had a real job. I get to make up stories for a living, and that is a privilege that I never take for granted.
Have either of you ever felt a sort of moments weird dislocation or déjà vu when interacting with fans or fan culture that reminds you of an experience that you had when you were younger and reading a book and having those moments of just intense connection or flights of fancy with your books and stuff like that, and now you're on the other side of it?
I don't, because I'm still a big fan of books and movies and TV, so I get those moments a lot. I don't think I've ever felt déjà vu about it. It's always kind of it's kind of been an ongoing thing with me. Um, I think a friend of mine did once because she'd gone to the Worldcon in Boston with me, which I think was would have been 2004, 2005 or something. And and that's the first time I think she'd been to a Worldcon, and she went to my reading, and there was maybe 10, 15 people there, and then people were talking to me afterward as we were leaving the room, and after that she was saying it was so cool to see people talking about your books just like we talk about them at home. And so it's like she'd never really experienced that before. Wait, you're a writer, and people know who you are. I mean, she kind of knew it intellectually, but this is the first time she'd ever seen it. So that was kind of funny.
True story. I've never actually been to Worldcon.
Really? Oh,
Yeah, it's never. No one's invited me, or it's never worked out, or I don't know. It just never happened. But I keep having Scalzi and all these other authors saying, you gotta go, you gotta go, you gotta go. And I thought I was going to go with this book, but than the pandemic. So
Panini.
I know I wouldn't say deja vu, although I've had the experience of meeting some of the authors I grew up reading, and getting to be the fanboy and say, tell them how much their work meant to me and how much it influenced me. And sometimes I've even been able to blurb their books, which has been a really, really cool experience. So when people say the same things to me, I get where they're coming from, because I have been on the other side of that. One of the coolest things for me was I was touring for my second book in Spain, and I kept talking about Anne McCaffrey. I don't know why I got on this jag of talking about Anne McCaffrey, but I did. And everyone was going, sorry, who? And it turned out her books had been out of print since, I don't know, the 80s or something, early 90s in Spain. And they ended up, my publisher ended up reprinting the Dragon Riders of Pern series in Spain, because I kept talking about it. And I got to blurb her books
What?
in Spain, which was so cool, because Anne McCaffrey gave me my first blurb ever. And that just, it's things like that that make you realize how all of this, ties together, culture and people and
That's
writing.
literally making me tear up. That's so beautiful. That's so, that is, man, I'm a little overwhelmed just because I keep thinking about lineage in science fiction and fantasy. It becomes it feels like sometimes there is one long conversation that has been happening, since the 60s, or since people started having these explicit spaces for conventions for fans to meet up and talk. And there are failure modes of that, I think, where sometimes you're kind of like, why are we still having this conversation? Didn't we get somewhere with it? But then there are other times where there are dropped threads, where you get to, pick up something that that was really important to you, and that there's been a gap, and now you get to actually pass that on to someone else and rekindle or reestablish this lineage. And I think that's just so beautiful. Can I actually ask, Christopher, when you said you started making the deliberate decision to go to conventions, were there a couple that you particularly enjoyed, that you would keep going to, or?
Denver Comic Con is good. Salt Lake City FanX / I think they call it the FanX show convention these days instead of Comic Con. Dragon Con. I haven't been to Emerald City Comic Con, but I've heard it's good, or maybe it's just called Emerald City. So mostly Dragon Con, Salt Lake City, and Denver, which are all, again, it's hard to fly anywhere from Montana. So going through Denver, Salt Lake City is like, to go anywhere, I have to fly through Denver or Salt Lake City. So going there is the easy bet. Phoenix Comic Con is also really good. San Diego is just, it's great if you have a big property, but it's too big. It's not really fun anymore, at least for me. It's great to go once or twice. It's the mecca of sci-fi fandom, but I wouldn't go there unless I have a business reason to go there. Martha, how about you?
Armadillo-Con in Austin. It's also a small regional, very book focused, usually around between 500 and 600 people. That's one of the few cons regional cons where the readings are so popular. It's like people will be in the reading room all day, just sitting there listening to different people. There's so many good places to go out to eat around Austin. It's just a cornucopia. And also recently, before the pandemic, I was one of the guests of honor for Capclave, which is near Washington, D.C. And that was a lot of fun too. And I really liked that it was small, but it just felt like there was a lot of interaction between everyone and between the guests. It was a lot like Armadillo-Con, where you had so many opportunities to talk to the guests and everything. It wasn't, and there was a lot of interesting conversations, and it was just such a kind of like very homey for me, that it felt like Armadillo-Con that I've been going to since Armadillo-Con was the first science fiction convention I ever went to. Excuse me, when I was in junior high. A friend and I somehow convinced my parents to take us to it, and so we got to run around, and it was very teeny back then. Like the dealer's room was just in like a regular size hotel room kind of. So yeah, that one's been very special to me. And also I just like the energy of big conventions. That's one of the reasons why I like Worldcon, is just the the feel of so many things going on, and so many people that you don't ever normally get a chance to see where you live, and at small regionals.
Have you ever done Supernova in Australia?
Oh no, no.
So that's their Comic Con essentially, and they run it in a really interesting way. So they start in Sydney, and they do a weekend in Sydney, and then they take the week off, and they take their guests, and they take the guests around and show them nice things during the week, and then they have a second mirrored sister convention in Perth on the other the following weekend. And the cool thing is when I was there, I don't know if they still do this, but when I was there, which was 2012, I think, they did something really cool, which is they had one green room where they stuck everyone. Because if you go to like some of the really large conventions, the actors get stuck over here, the authors get stuck over here, everyone gets kind of, cordoned off. No, they stuck everyone together in the same green room, and so you got to meet really interesting people that you wouldn't get to meet otherwise. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed that. But the thing is, there are some amazing, amazing conventions around the world, and I love them because it's very rare in our day-to-day life to be able to be unabashedly enthusiastic about something in a way that is normally frowned upon. You basically at a convention you can wear your heart on your sleeve, and you walk in and here are thousands of people who are unabashed fans of XYZ. Maybe they have a costume, maybe they don't. But one thing you can be sure of is most people you see at a convention truly love something. And they're there to learn and grow and share that love. And I love that because aside from maybe sporting events, you don't really find that.
I think that's absolutely correct. And I think that in our genres, and like science fiction, fantasy in particular, the convention circuit is like a really unique thing. Like when I talk to author friends who write historical fiction or domestic realism and so on, they really feel, at least from my anecdotal evidence of their conversations and stuff, they really feel the absence of that there isn't a kind of built-in place where you can meet fans or meet other authors for that, except for large festivals which have their own different dynamics and things like that. And I think that there's a little bit more but like in the convention space, things feel a little bit, it's not that there are no hierarchies, but it feels a lot more evenly spaced, I guess.
Yeah, there's just opportunities to sit around and talk to people. Uh, Comic-Con, in Houston, or used to be Comic Palooza, that's huge, takes up the entire convention center. And what was cool is seeing so many people there that we wouldn't normally see at a small regional con, that would have no idea that small regional cons exist. And just entire families all in costume, from little kids up to parents, and pushing the stroller, dressed as Luke and Leia and that kind of thing, and just seeing so many different people and so many different expressions of fandom and enthusiasm.
Yeah, it's a good point about other genres not having this. After having this experience, going and writing. I mean, I know there are murder mystery conventions and lots of stuff for the romance fans. But yeah, you go write a historical novel and it goes out and does well, and you know what? You're on your own. That is a really strong argument for staying into the sci-fi, fantasy, and maybe even the horror genre. There's a convention in Italy, in Lucca, Italy, called the Lucca Gaming Convention, something like that. And it's an old walled city that only has about 60,000 people or something, maybe 80,000 people. And when I was there, and I think the numbers have gone up since then, they had 400,000 people come to the convention because it draws in the Asian fans, and it draws in the Western fans and the European fans, and the entire city gets occupied. And I think that is the correct word. It gets occupied. The streets are undrivable. They're just solid. And it's like, wow, that again, that love and enthusiasm is something I really enjoy participating in. Even if I weren't writing, it's such a fun thing to be able to be a part of.
That's awesome. So I'm keeping an eye on the time, and I think we're going to need to be wrapping up in the next few minutes. But the last question I wanted to kind of touch on, given that we've mentioned, obviously, we all know the circumstances in which we are having this conversation. Um, some friends of mine have taken to calling it the panini, which I find is actually extremely charming, just to avoid saying the same word over and over. But I'm curious to know. So I have observed two broad streams of reaction towards books during these uncertain times, capital letters on each one of those words. And some people I know have sort of been binging reading a lot more than they ever have before because of, different divisions of time and labor. And other people, and I include myself in this category, have found it extremely difficult to read. And I was wondering if you found yourselves falling into either one of these camps. And if you just wanted to talk a little bit about like what books have meant to you during this time.
It's been pretty important to find some way to kind of take a mental vacation. So I actually was able to keep reading most of the time. I know a lot of people who didn't. It was harder for me to focus on stuff sometimes, but I was actually able to keep a slow, a much slower version of my normal reading schedule, basically. One thing I noticed was we had a very unexpected, very deadly winter storm down here when we were without power off and on for most of a week. And for the 2 days where we literally only had like 20 minutes of power, I almost ran my phone down reading. And it's just, I'd had trouble getting into stuff before that, but I was like I think I read like 2 or 3 novellas and finished a book because I needed to be somewhere else. My brain needed to be not here. And so that was kind of, so I was glad I was able to keep reading. I think I had writer's block for the first 6 months of the pandemic and literally got nothing done until around July. So if I'd not been able to read, I think that would have been so much worse.
I think I came at this whole experience from a different place than a lot of people because, again, of having grown up homeschooled. So the experience of being, I mean, you have to understand, I grew up and I still live in a very rural part of Montana. So, when I was a kid, the nearest neighbors were a half mile away and they didn't have children. The nearest town was a 30-minute drive, and that was a like 6,000 person town. And I didn't drive as a kid, of course. So being isolated and finding ways to entertain myself were things that I'm used to. And I've already developed habits long ago to deal with that sort of a situation. Uh, I have been ridiculously productive over the last year and a half. I have been reading and writing, and I have not gotten sick in all going on 2 years because I haven't been going to the conventions and I haven't been traveling. I spent all of 2019. I was actually Barnes and Noble's. Barnes and Noble started a new um, program, which they had to discontinue because of COVID, where they had an author in residence program. So I spent all of 2019 traveling to a different B&N store every single month for the entire year, as well as touring for a new book that came out. And as a result, I was sick, I want to say 9 or 10 months out of that
Oh
year.
my
I
gosh.
got it and I couldn't shake it. So my advice would be if anyone is watching this and struggles with isolation and all of this, you have to find ways to be productive. You have to find ways to get the interaction you need, whether that's Zoom calls with friends or reading, or for me, I set goals. I set big, giant goals that are going to take years of my life to accomplish, and then I don't think about anything else. I'm very one-minded when it comes to that, and that helps me. I'm not saying it isn't difficult because it sure is, current circumstances, but having goals and that you really care about kind of make all the other things fall to the wayside.
Well, I think that is basically the point at which we should be wrapping it up. So I want to thank you both so much for this conversation. And I want to thank the Library of Congress for organizing it and putting it together. And just thank you so much for your contributions and insights and sharing as much as you have about your lives in books and in writing and so on. So thank you so very much. I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Well, thank you.
And a big thank you to the Library of Congress.
We hope you've enjoyed this conversation, and now we'd like you to hear more from the library's own experts on this topic.
Welcome to the Library of Congress. My name is Meg Metcalf, and I'm joining you from the Jefferson Building, home to the library's magnificent main reading room, where I work as the Women's, Gender, and LGBTQIA+ Studies Librarian and Collection Specialist. Main Reading Room librarians are here to help you navigate the unparalleled collections of the world's largest library. These collections include over 171 million items in over 460 languages, with materials on every subject imaginable. On our shelves, you can find not only books and magazines, but you can also make connections to reading cultures and communities, past and present. National Book Festival featured authors Christopher Paolini and Martha Wells have discussed the community-building, world-expanding, boundary-pushing power of science fiction and fantasy. There is perhaps no better example of community building through print than the library's collection of science fiction fanzines, periodicals, anthologies, and convention proceedings. Before social media and large science fiction conventions, sci-fi fans needed a way to communicate, and so a new medium was born, the fanzine. A fanzine is a self-published format invented in the 1920s by science fiction fans who needed a way to communicate and share information. Here, we have Fantasy Book, a science fiction zine from 1947. This inaugural issue is special not just because it stands as an example of science fiction zine publishing, but also because the cover story is People of the Crater by Andrew North. This is the first science fiction story published by female author Alice or Andre Norton, who used a number of male pseudonyms early on in order to get her work published. She went on to become the first woman to be inducted into the Science Fiction and Fantasy Hall of Fame in 1997. Believe it or not, Norton actually worked for the Library of Congress in the early 1940s. The library holds many of Norton's first edition books here, including Quag Keep, the first novel set in the Dungeons and Dragons universe. Another early science fiction zine published under a pseudonym is The Brain of the Planet by Lilith Lorraine. This was one of several pen names of Mary Maud Wright. Published in 1929, The Brain of the Planet begins with an announcement that telepathy is real, and the radical socialist professor is determined to use this new discovery to achieve a worldwide egalitarian society. The new feminist socialist utopia that resulted was one of gender equality and unprecedented innovation. Like fanzines, the feminist utopia of Herland was originally self-published by Charlotte Perkins Gilman in her periodical, The Forerunner. Here we have the original volume from 1915, featuring the very first chapter of the novel. This is significant because Herland was not published in book form until 1979. So, for over 60 years, this self-published periodical would have been the only way to read it. These treasures are just some of many in the library's general and international collections, which contain countless science fiction books, magazines, directories, and anthologies. So what are you waiting for? Begin exploring our collections online at loc.gov or write to us at ask.loc.gov, and our reference librarians and subject matter experts will assist you.